let me get started with this. It's important to understand that why this is important, right? Cryptocurrency value today is larger than the national GDPs of all of these countries, right? And in terms of its use, it is growing at a staggering rate globally. So it's not just in the industrialized countries or the developing countries. In fact, when I was in Cameroon, we went to a restaurant, and the only currency that they accepted was cryptocurrency, right? Primarily Bitcoin, because their local currency was very unstable. And when we look at adoption, right, and we look at things like the number of wallet downloads for different cryptocurrencies, right, the curve is staggering, and this curve is a little old. The numbers have gotten even higher than that, right? And the cryptocurrency market cap. So this was up through July of 20, right? So this market cap that you see, that spike there in the middle, we have now exceeded that and gone even beyond that. So while the size of the cryptocurrency market cap is still relatively small compared to the global economy, the rate at which it's growing is staggering. And so I want to give you just a brief history of how we got here. So the first blockchain, if we look at it in the 1982, David Chaum proposed a protocol. And basically, he was addressing how can computer systems be established, maintained, and trusted by mutually suspicious groups. And Stuart Haber and Scott Sternetta in 1991 tried to answer a question. Scott became increasingly disturbed by the fact that he saw the world was going digital, and there was no way to validate the authenticity of a digital record, right? And that really started to bother him. So he went to his research partner at Bell Labs, David, and he talked about this problem. They agreed to work on this research project, and they tried and they tried and they tried, and they just couldn't figure out any way to validate a digital record. And Scott was having dinner with his wife, Marcia, in a restaurant in New York, and the thought occurred to him. He was thinking about this problem. He thought, if two people engaged in a transaction, you would need a third person to validate it. But two of those parties could be in collusion against each other, so you would need a fourth person to validate. But those three or four people could be in collusion together, so you need a fifth and sixth and seventh, and the problem just went on exponentially. And then the thought occurred to him while he was having dinner. This sentence popped into his mind. He said, when enough people are involved in the collusion, it's no longer collusion, it's consensus. And he put his fork down, he looked at his wife, and he said, I think I just thought of something, and I think it's important. So if you fast forward to 2008, there was a problem going on, right? The fight, for those of you that are old enough to remember, the financial crisis was going on, right? Global banks were too big to fail, right? It was the worst financial crisis. Financial institutions were crumbling. The government had to step in. There was massive outcries by the people. We saw Occupy Wall Street, right? There was a global economic downturn. And in that time, somebody under the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, who had been exposed to Scott and Hal's work, right, wrote this little white paper, right, called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. In fact, we know that Scott's work was instrumental in that, because if you look at the 8 references, 3 of those belong to Scott and his research partner, right? And so what this paper basically said is, I think that there's a way that we can move money from person to person without going through a bank, right? And the paper is only 8 pages long. It's easy enough to pull down from the internet and read it, right? And that was happening at a time where there was massive distrust in large financial institutions, right? Not just financial institutions, but any kind of institutions, right? The government, the banks, right? Public trust in government had been essentially declining since the late 1950s, right? And there was this sweeping populist movement going on around the world, right? Brexit wanted to break out from the EU. And here in the United States, we saw the immense popularity of people like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who, interestingly enough, even though they had completely opposite political philosophies, their message was the same, right? Their message essentially was a movement of the people against the elites. In fact, just recently, with the whole GameStop issue, we saw that same kind of pressure from society coming up, right? Oops. So the white paper came out, and the first transaction happened on May 22nd, I think it was 2009, where 10,000 Bitcoins were sold. Well, let me back up a little bit. So that paper came out. There's a couple people that wrote some open source code about these wallets and how they can move money back and forth. They just started, it was like Monopoly money or funny money. But the first transaction happened on May 22nd, right, when 10,000 Bitcoins were exchanged for 2 Domino's pizzas, or 2, yeah, I think it was Domino's pizzas, right? And then we started seeing these getting picked up by different places, and we started seeing Bitcoin ATMs more and more. And then Bitcoin was just the first, but today there are literally thousands of different coins. And we can talk a little bit about what makes them different and how they evolved. But in addition to the thousands of different coins, right, and there's many of them, they have all different kinds of market caps and things like that. An entire ecosystem started to grow and develop out of these different cryptocurrencies. And we needed all kinds of support services, right? Applications, so people would put apps for their phone, and associations like the GBA, exchanges, financial infrastructure, mining, news and data, payment services, all kinds of different entities started to develop. And if one of the early criticisms of Bitcoin was that it was unstable. In fact, if you Google Bitcoin obituary, you'll read hundreds and thousands of statements from very respected sources talking about how Bitcoin is dead. But if we look at what happened 2009, 10, 11, 12, all the way up until 2020, while the price of Bitcoin has been unstable, it has consistently grown. And what's interestingly enough is if you look at the dollar, right, the dollar has increasingly shrunk in terms of the value of the dollar compared. If you had, in 2009, if you had $1 and you exchange that for 500 Bitcoins, right, in 2020, that dollar would be worth 83 cents. The Bitcoins would be worth almost $10,000 in 2020, and even more today. So when people would say that Bitcoins are unstable, I would say you're absolutely right. And the dollar is very stable. It's just that I don't like the direction the dollar is going in, and I like the direction that Bitcoins are going in. And so the Bitcoin blockchain was the first actual well, not the first but it was the first sort of popular adopted blockchain. But since then, there have been lots of other blockchains, right? And those blockchains all have different purposes and functions, right? Some are more private, some have different features, some allow you to put in computer code, some are faster, right? And they all have these different parameters, and many of them have different tokens on them, like Bitcoin was.